Got a story for you today about a lie that had everything going for it. It had a name, it had a place, it had a time, it even had a woman in a red shirt. The only thing it didn't have was the one thing it needed most, and that was the truth. Someone spent about 10 days dismantling a fabrication piece by piece, not by getting angry, not by confronting anyone at the wrong moment, not by saying a single word she couldn't back up. She just kept her calendar, kept her receipts, and waited for the story to collapse under its own weight. I'm going to tell you exactly how it happened. Her name is Mara. She's 31. She works as a project coordinator for a logistics company in Portland, Oregon, the kind of job where you spend your days tracking things, cross-referencing timelines, making sure nothing falls through the cracks. She's been with her husband Joel for 7 years, married for 4. Joel is a civil engineer. He does infrastructure work, bridges, drainage systems, road rehabilitation, and it takes him out of town on a regular basis. Not every week, but enough that Mara's used to it. She doesn't love it, but she trusts him. There's a difference. And then there was Diane. Diane had been Mara's best friend for 9 years, since the second semester of junior year at Oregon State. They were in the same dorm hallway. They had a class together, some elective about environmental policy that neither of them particularly cared about. But they sat next to each other every Tuesday and Thursday for 16 weeks, and somewhere between week 3 and week 8, they became the kind of friends who share everything. 9 years is a long time. Long enough to be in each other's weddings. Long enough to know the other person's family almost as well as your own. Long enough to trust someone completely. That's what made this so devastating. And that's what made it worth telling you. Whatever you're doing right now, driving, working, folding laundry, just listening, settle in. This one takes a minute to unspool. But I promise you, by the time it's done, you'll understand exactly why Mara didn't panic. And why Diane should have known better than to pick a story with a timestamp. Let's get into it. Before I tell you what Diane said, I need you to understand what Mara thought she was getting when she got Diane. Not the version that came later, the original. Diane was, by all accounts, one of those people who makes your life feel more organized just by being in it. She remembered birthdays without prompting. She showed up early to help you set up for parties. She was the person in the friend group who kept the group chat active, who suggested the dinner reservations, who sent the article she knew you'd find interesting, even when you hadn't talked in 2 weeks. She was present in the way that some people just naturally are, and Mara, who had a quieter, more internal kind of personality, had always found that quality in Diane genuinely comforting. They had done everything together the way close female friendships sometimes work in your 20s. They had gone through bad breakups together, not at the same time, but in that relay race way where one person holds the other up, then the roles switch. Diane had been the person Mara called when she got her first real job and couldn't believe it was actually happening. Mara had been the one sitting in Diane's kitchen at 2 in the morning when Diane's last serious relationship ended, and Diane couldn't stop crying long enough to make sense. When Mara met Joel through a mutual friend at a birthday party in the Northeast neighborhood, Diane was the first person she called. Tell me everything Diane had said, and Mara had told her everything, and Diane had said he sounded wonderful and she couldn't wait to meet him. She met him 3 weeks later. She liked him immediately. She told Mara afterward, he's real, like actually real. That's rare. Mara had agreed. That was the thing about Joel. He was almost aggressively unpretentious. He talked about drainage systems with the same earnestness that other people reserved for their passions. He remembered the names of Mara's coworkers and asked follow-up questions about them weeks later. He wasn't charming in a performed way. He was just present. He was just there. Diane had been at the wedding. She was one of Mara's 3 bridesmaids. Tasha and Kira were the other 2. Tasha was a physical therapist. Kira ran a small catering business out of her home kitchen. The 4 of them formed the kind of compact, durable friend group that doesn't require a lot of maintenance because it's built on a foundation that doesn't move. They saw each other every few weeks. They had a group chat. They had inside jokes that were years old and still landed. Mara didn't think anything was wrong in any of these relationships. That's an important thing to know. She wasn't watching for warning signs. She wasn't suspicious of anyone. She was just living her life, going to work, coming home, texting her friends, and enjoying the particular rhythm of a marriage where both people have found something solid. Joel's work trips were the one wrinkle, and even that wasn't a wrinkle so much as a texture. He went away for days at a time, sometimes longer on big projects. He always texted when he landed. He called most nights. He took photos of weird regional chain restaurants and sent them to Mara with the caption local cuisine. She had a folder on her phone called Joel's America that was full of these photos. Bad lighting, mediocre food, enormous portion sizes. She loved that folder. The thing about a happy marriage is that it doesn't announce itself. It just exists. You wake up, you have coffee, you bicker mildly about whose turn it is to take the recycling out, you go to sleep. There's no dramatic proof of love, there's just continuity. The texture of a shared life. Mara had that. She knew she had it. She wasn't naive about it, wasn't blind to the possibility that things can go wrong in any relationship, but she also wasn't living in a state of braced anticipation. She trusted Joel not because she'd never thought about what it would feel like not to, but because 7 years of actual evidence had accumulated on one side of the scale and nothing credible had accumulated on the other. That would matter later. That orientation toward evidence would turn out to be the thing that saved her. But first there was Diane. There were, in retrospect, things Mara had filed away without fully examining. Small things. The kind of things that you notice in the moment and then let go of because the most benign explanation is the most available one, and you're not in the business of manufacturing problems. For instance, whenever Joel was out of town, Diane seemed to become more available, more solicitous. She'd text more often, suggest getting together more often, check in with an energy that read as genuinely caring, but had a slightly unusual frequency. Not alarming, just a notch higher than baseline. For instance, Diane had on 2 or 3 occasions over the past year or so made comments that Mara had registered as odd but hadn't dwelt on. Things like, most guys in Joel's position would take advantage of all that travel time, delivered with a kind of conspiratorial raise of the eyebrow that Mara had interpreted as Diane just being Diane, a little dramatic, a little prone to dark humor. She hadn't thought more about it. For instance, once during a night out, with just the two of them, Diane had asked Mara almost too carefully, too casually, whether she and Joel ever had the kind of arguments that made her feel like she didn't know him. Mara had said no genuinely, and Diane had nodded and said, "Good, that's good." But the question had lingered oddly in the air for a moment before the conversation moved on. Mara hadn't connected these things. There was no reason to connect them. Taken individually, they were nothing. A friend who cared. A friend with a slightly pessimistic worldview about men, maybe Diane's own dating history had been complicated. Her last serious relationship, a slow-motion disaster that had left her with what Mara thought of as a reasonable but sometimes excessive wariness about partnership in general. Mara hadn't connected them, and then the Tuesday in October came, and she started to. It started with a text, not a phone call, a text. Mara was at her desk, midway through, cross-referencing a shipment manifest against a vendor invoice when her phone buzzed with Diane's name. This was not unusual. Diane texted frequently, but the text itself was different from the usual traffic. "Hey, are you free to talk later? There's something I need to tell you, and I don't want to do it over text." Mara's stomach went cold. Not because she knew what was coming. She didn't know. But there's a kind of sentence that only ever means a small number of things and none of them are good. And there's something I need to tell you is that kind of sentence. She sat with the feeling for a minute before she typed back. "I can talk at 7. "Everything okay?" Diane's response came quickly. "Not really, but I'll explain tonight. It's about Joel." And then Mara's stomach wasn't just cold, it dropped. She finished the rest of her workday on autopilot. She wasn't panicking. She was doing that thing she did when she didn't know what she was dealing with. Yet, the thing where she kept moving and kept her hands busy and refused to spend energy on a scenario, she hadn't confirmed. But underneath the autopilot, something had shifted. The ordinary texture of the day had cracked slightly, and through the crack, something uncomfortable was breathing. At 7, she called Diane. Diane answered on the second ring and immediately sounded careful. The kind of careful that sounds like rehearsal. She said, "Okay. I need you to hear me out before you say anything, okay? I'm telling you this because I love you and I need you to know." Mara said, "Just tell me." And Diane told her. She said she had been downtown, she couldn't remember the exact date sometime in the past 2 weeks, and she had seen Joel with a woman at a coffee shop not far from the Pearl District. She said they were sitting close together, that the body language was not that of colleagues, that Joel had reached across the table at one point and touched the woman's hand. She said the woman was dark-haired, probably around their age, and she had been laughing at something Joel said. Mara listened to all of this without speaking. When Diane stopped, she said, "Which coffee shop?" Diane paused. "I don't remember the exact name. One of the ones near 11th. "What day? I honestly can't pin it down exactly. I was walking back to my car after an errand, and I looked through the window and I saw him." Mara said, "Okay." Diane said, "I'm so sorry, Mara. I've been going back and forth about whether to tell you for days." Mara said, "I have to think. I'll call you tomorrow." She hung up. She sat on the couch. She didn't cry. She didn't call Joel. She sat with it for a long time, doing what she always did with new information. She let it settle, and then she started looking at it. The thing was, and she would articulate this better later, but even in that moment on the couch, the story felt simultaneously too alarming and not alarming enough. It was alarming because Diane was her closest friend and had no obvious reason to fabricate something like this. But it wasn't alarming in the particular way that true things tend to be alarming, because it had no edges. No date, no name, no coffee shop. It was impressionistic. It was vibes. That wasn't enough. That was the first thing she decided sitting on that couch. She needed something specific, and she was going to ask for it. She called Diane the next morning. She had slept badly, not catastrophically, but badly. She'd woken up at 4 and lain there in the dark running timelines in her head like she was prepping for a project review. When had Joel been in Portland recently? What had he done? Where had he gone? She had a reasonable memory for schedules because her work required it, and what she came up with in her 4 a.m. audit was not nothing. Joel had been home most of the past 2 weeks. She could think of a few afternoons where he'd been out running errands or meeting a colleague for lunch. Any of those could theoretically be it. She needed more from Diane. She called her at 8. "I've been thinking," Mara said. "I need more details if I'm going to take this seriously. Can you walk me through it again?" Diane said yes, of course, and began. And here's where Mara noticed the first thing. The story was more specific than it had been the night before. The coffee shop now had a name, or close to one. Diane said it was that one with the green awning. I think it's called Prospect or something. It's on 11th, between Couch and Davis. A specific block, a specific awning color. Neither of these details had been in the first telling. The woman's appearance was more detailed. She was wearing a red shirt. She had silver earrings. She seemed to be laughing a lot. The date had sharpened too. I think it was last Saturday. I'd just come from the farmer's market. Mara absorbed all of this without showing what she was thinking. She said, "And you're sure it was Joel Mara?" Diane's voice carried a weight of gentle certainty. "I've known Joel for 7 years. I know what he looks like. He was sitting right there in the window. I was maybe 20 feet away," Mara said. "Okay, I appreciate you telling me." She hung up. She got out her phone. She opened the calendar app. Last Saturday, Joel had been in Boise, Idaho at a job site. He'd flown out Friday morning and come back Sunday evening. Mara had dropped him at PDX at 6:15 Friday morning. She had then come home, had coffee with Tasha, who had happened to come over that afternoon, and spent Saturday doing laundry and watching television and texting Joel 3 times over the course of the day, receiving 3 responses that included a photo of a truly enormous plate of chicken fried steak from a diner near his hotel. The chicken fried steak photo was on her phone. The texts were on her phone. The calendar entry, Joel Boise GRP 7 drainage project, was on her phone, entered weeks ago when he'd gotten the assignment. Mara didn't call Joel yet. She sat with this for a moment. The story Diane had told her on Tuesday was not the same story she had told on Wednesday. The first version had been fuzzy, impressionistic, dateless. The second version had a specific address, a specific day, a specific item of clothing. Real memories don't work that way. Real memories, when you revisit them, tend to fill in some details and lose others. They get more uncertain in some places while becoming clearer in others. They breathe. What Diane's story had done was the opposite of breathing. It had calcified rapidly in the direction of specificity. It had answered the questions that Mara had asked, and in doing so, it had given her something to check. She was going to check it, but not yet. She wanted one more data point. The second escalation came not from Diane directly, but from the group chat. 2 days after Mara's second conversation with Diane, she received a text from Tasha. Not in the group chat, a private message. It said, "Hey, are you doing okay? I heard things might be rough right now." Mara went still. She had not told Tasha anything. She had not told anyone anything. She was still in the middle of the process of figuring out what she even had, what was true, what was fabricated, what the shape of this situation actually was. She had been deliberately carefully quiet about it because she wasn't the kind of person who ran to others with unverified accusations about her own husband. And yet, Tasha knew. Which meant Diane had told her. My stomach dropped in a way that was different from the first time. The first time when I got the text that said, "It's about Joel," it had been cold fear, the fear of something unknown. This time, it was something else. This time, it was a kind of stunned clarity, the feeling you get when a piece of a puzzle lands and suddenly 3 other pieces make sense. Diane had gone to Tasha and Kira before Mara had even had a chance to respond to the first story, before Mara had asked a single follow-up question, before Mara had done anything except listen. And that meant one of two things. Either Diane was genuinely so worried about Mara that she couldn't keep the information to herself and felt compelled to mobilize the friend group to support her, which was possible. Diane was sometimes like that, sometimes a little chaotic in her care, a little much. Or she had wanted the story to already be established before Mara could look into it. She had wanted the consensus to already exist. She had wanted Mara to receive the news of her husband's alleged infidelity, not as a question, but as a verdict pre-deliberated, endorsed by multiple people Mara trusted. Mara texted Tasha back, "I'm okay, still figuring out what's going on. Give me a few days." Tasha sent back a heart emoji and "I'm here whenever." Mara put her phone down and called Joel. It was a Thursday afternoon. He was in the office between meetings. She could hear the ambient hum of the engineering firm behind his voice when he answered. "Hey," he said. "What's up?" she told him. She told him the whole thing clearly, chronologically, without editorial. The text from Diane. The first conversation. The second conversation with the new details. The message from Tasha. Joel was quiet for what felt like a long time. "Last Saturday," he said finally. "Yes. Mara, I was in Boise. I know. I sent you a picture of a chicken fried steak. I know." Another silence. "Send me the screenshots. Everything Diane's text or conversation, logs the calendar entry. Send me the hotel confirmation too. I'll forward it to you. I booked through the company travel system, so there's a confirmation email." "I know," she said again. "I'm going to." "Do you believe her?" There was a moment before she answered. An honest moment. "I don't know what I believe yet," she said, "but the story got more specific when I asked questions, and she told Tasha before she even knew what I was going to do with the information." Joel said quietly, "Those aren't the things innocent mistakes do." "No," Mara agreed, "they're not." They were on the phone for another 40 minutes. They went through everything systematically, not frantically, not emotionally, but the way two people who share a life and a schedule and 7 years of accumulated context go through something when they're trying to establish the ground truth. Joel logged into the company travel portal and forwarded the booking confirmation 2 nights at a Boise hotel Friday, October 13th through Sunday, October 15th. He forwarded the flight confirmation Alaska Airlines PDX to BOI, departing 7:45 Friday morning. He sent her the receipt from the Boise diner, paid with his personal card, Saturday afternoon time, stamped 1:47 p.m. At approximately 1:47 p.m. last Saturday, Joel was paying for an enormous plate of chicken fried steak at a diner in Boise, Idaho. Diane had said she saw him at a coffee shop in Portland at around 2 in the afternoon. There it was. Mara laid it out in a document, just for herself. A clean, simple timeline with sources attached: calendar, entry, flight confirmation, hotel confirmation, diner receipt, the chicken fried steak photo with its timestamp, the text from Diane, the note about when Tasha had reached out. She didn't add commentary, she just laid it out. Then she closed the document and thought about what she was going to do with it. All right, let me take a second here because I think this is the part of the story where it's worth slowing down and sitting with the actual complexity of what Mara was dealing with. Because here's the thing, it would have been very easy in that moment to do the obvious thing. To call Diane, tell her the timeline didn't work, demand an explanation, maybe scream a little. To send the receipts directly to the group chat. To get everyone on the phone and blow the whole thing up immediately. And I think a lot of people would have done exactly that. When you're feeling that particular combination of betrayal and vindication, the righteous fury of someone who is about to be lied to and caught it in time, the impulse to deploy the evidence immediately is almost overwhelming. But Mara didn't do that, and I think it's worth asking why. Part of it was her personality. She's the kind of person who doesn't spend resources before she knows what she's buying. She had the receipts. But what did she actually know? She knew that Diane's story didn't hold up geographically and temporally. She knew that Diane had expanded the story when asked for details rather than expressing uncertainty. She knew that Diane had told other people before giving Mara the chance to respond. What she didn't know yet was the shape of the thing. Was this a delusion? Had Diane convinced herself she'd seen something she hadn't? Was it a mistake made in genuine distress? A story she'd started because she thought she was protecting Mara and then couldn't walk back? Or was it something more deliberate? Something with intent? There's a meaningful difference between those things. And Mara, to her credit, was not going to assign the worst interpretation before she had reason to. But also, and I think this is the harder thing to say, there's the other angle, which is Diane's angle. If you took Diane's story at face value, you'd see someone who loved her friend enough to report something uncomfortable and potentially devastating. You'd see someone willing to blow up a relationship to tell what she thought was the truth. In that reading, Diane is almost heroic, the kind of friend who doesn't look away, who accepts the risk of being the messenger. The problem, of course, is that every part of Diane's heroic narrative depended on the story being real, and the story wasn't real. And in the absence of a real story, Diane's choices looked very different. The eagerness to tell Tasha and Kira, the way the details sharpened in the second telling, the certainty she projected even when the geography was impossible. Real memories come with doubt. Real witnesses say, "I'm pretty sure and it looked like." Fake certainty sounds exactly like certainty. It sounds like confidence because it has no actual uncertainty to express. Here's what I know about liars. Real memories fade at the edges. They blur and shift and contradict themselves in the small ways that authentic experience always does. But fake memories get sharper the more you're questioned. Because you're not trying to remember something, you're trying to convince someone. And convincing someone requires details. Diane had been very, very convincing, right up until the moment she gave Mara something to check. Mara decided to let Diane come to her. She didn't call, she didn't text. She waited 2 days, letting the silence settle, and then on Sunday evening, she sent a single message. "Can you come over this week? I need to talk through some things. Tuesday works, if that's good for you." Diane responded within minutes. "Of course. Tuesday's perfect. I'm so sorry you're going through this." Mara sent back a thumbs up. She didn't tell Diane that Joel would be there. Joel had offered calmly without drama to be present for the conversation. "It's my reputation she's talking about," he said. "I think I've earned the right to be in the room," Mara had agreed. Not because she wanted it to be confrontational, but because having Joel there meant the geography of the situation was impossible to avoid. Diane couldn't describe seeing Joel somewhere. He wasn't if Joel was sitting across the table from her. Tuesday came. Diane arrived at 7 with a bottle of wine and the particular energy of someone steeling themselves for something difficult but necessary. She was wearing a coat, she was carrying the wine, and she stepped through the door with the careful warmth of someone who had rehearsed compassion. And then she saw Joel at the kitchen table. She stopped. Her face did something complicated, a kind of rearrangement, like something that had been arranged for one purpose was being hastily reconfigured for another. Then she composed herself and said, "Hi, Joel." Joel said, "Hey, Diane." Neither of them moved. Mara closed the door behind Diane and gestured toward the kitchen. "Come sit down." They sat. Mara did not offer wine. The bottle sat in its paper bag on the counter. Mara had decided beforehand how she was going to do this, and she had decided to do it the same way she did project reviews at work, methodically in order with sources. No yelling, no accusation, delivered as an accusation, just questions. She said, "Diane, I want to go back through what you told me last week, because some things aren't adding up, and I want to understand." Diane nodded, and Mara could already see the slight recalibration happening, the mental adjustment from a conversation she'd prepared for to a conversation she was now realizing was going to be different. "You said you saw Joel at a coffee shop downtown. Last Saturday, right?" Diane said. "Around 2 o'clock. You'd come from the farmer's market." "Yeah, I think so. I mean, it was that general time frame. And the coffee shop was on 11th between Couch and Davis." A brief pause. "I think so, yeah." Mara set her phone on the table screen up. On it was the calendar entry. Joel Boise GRP 7 Drainage Project. Oct 13, Oct 15. Joel flew to Boise on Friday the 13th, she said. He came back Sunday the 15th. He was not in Portland on Saturday. Diane looked at the phone. She looked at Joel. She looked at Mara. She stopped. "I have the flight confirmation," Mara said. "I have the hotel booking. I have a receipt from a restaurant in Boise time-stamped 1:47 p.m. on Saturday. And I have a photo he texted me from Boise at 2:03 p.m. on Saturday." She put all of it on the table one after another. Not dramatically. Not like a lawyer. Just like someone laying out the pieces of a project that needed to be reviewed. Diane looked at each document. A silence opened up and stretched. And then it happened. That moment. I've tried to describe it the way Mara described it to me, and the closest I can get is this: Diane's face didn't fall. It didn't crumple. It didn't do the thing you might expect, the obvious register of guilt or shame. Instead, it went very still, like something that had been running stopped, like a clock pausing. And Mara recognized it for what it was the moment Diane understood that the architecture she had built, whatever it was for, was not going to hold, Diane Mara said. Her voice was completely even. What were you trying to do? Diane looked up from the documents, and for one moment Mara thought she was going to say something true. She thought she was going to get an explanation, maybe not a good one, maybe not one that made sense, but something real, some actual piece of what had happened under the surface of 9 years of friendship. But Diane didn't give her that. What she said was, "Maybe I got the date wrong." A long pause. Maybe Mara said carefully, "You got the date wrong." "I could have. I've been stressed lately. I might have confused the days." Joel spoke for the first time. He said it quietly, without heat. "Diane, if you were confused about the date, why are you sure it was me?" Diane looked at him. "If your timeline is uncertain," Joel continued, "then either you saw someone who might have been me sometime in the past few weeks and convinced yourself it was definitely me, or the date is exactly right, and it wasn't me at all. Which one is it?" A long silence. "I know what I saw," Diane said, but there was something different in it now. The certainty had a hollow sound. Mara said, "You told Tasha and Kira before I had said a single word to you about this. Before I asked any questions. Before I even had a chance to respond to your first message." Diane's jaw tightened. "Why did you do that? I was worried about you. I didn't know what to do. I needed to talk to someone. You needed to talk to someone before you'd even spoken to me about it." Silence. Mara picked up the documents one by one and placed them in a neat stack. She was not angry. Or rather, she was something past anger in the register beyond it, where things get very quiet and very clear. "You told them a story about my husband," she said. "A specific story with a date and a place and a woman in a red shirt. And that story is not true. Joel was not in Portland last Saturday at 2 in the afternoon. He was in Boise, Idaho. I have documentation that proves this in 4 separate ways, and those documents existed before you told me anything because they're just the normal record of our life. A calendar, a flight, a hotel reservation, a lunch receipt, a text message with a photo." She looked at Diane directly. "I'm going to ask you one more time, and then I'm not going to ask again. What were you trying to do?" Diane sat for a long moment, and then she stood up, picked up her coat from the back of the chair, and said very quietly, "I think I should go." Mara didn't stop her. She walked to the door. She opened it. She left. And Mara and Joel sat in the kitchen in the silence that followed, and just for a moment, the only sound was the refrigerator's hum and the distant noise of a car passing on the street outside. Then Joel said, "Well?" And Mara said, "Yeah." And they sat with it for a while longer. What happened after the door closed was not dramatic. There was no phone call to the group chat, no mass confrontation, no carefully worded social media post. There was Mara and Joel sitting in the kitchen talking for 2 hours about what had just happened and what it meant and what they wanted to do with it. The thing they kept coming back to was the same thing. Why? They didn't have an answer. They still don't. Not a complete one. But they talked through what they knew, and what they knew included all those small moments that Mara had filed away without examining. The way Diane got more attentive when Joel was out of town, the comments about how men in his position usually took advantage of the opportunity, the question about whether Mara ever felt like she didn't know Joel. None of it was proof of anything. But taken together, it drew a rough shape of something that had been building for a while under the surface of what Mara had thought she knew. Joel said at one point, "Do you think she wanted you to leave?" Mara thought about it honestly. "I don't know if she'd thought it through that far, but I think maybe she wanted me to doubt. I think she wanted me to be uncertain about you. Why, I don't know. They didn't know." Maybe Diane had her own feelings about Joel that had soured somewhere along the way and she'd never fully examined them. Maybe she'd become genuinely convinced through some private logic Mara couldn't follow that Joel was the kind of person who would do this and was somehow preemptively warning Mara. Maybe there was something else, entirely something that had nothing to do with Joel and everything to do with what their friendship had come to mean to Diane and what she got from being the person Mara needed. Maybe none of those things. Maybe some combination. Mara was careful not to build a narrative she couldn't support with evidence, even in her own head. What she decided to do was simple. She forwarded the documentation to Tasha and Kira, not with a message, not with an explanation, just the screenshots, the booking confirmation, the hotel receipt, the diner receipt, the timestamp photo, and one line: Joel was in Boise. Here's the documentation. Then she waited. Tasha responded first 20 minutes later. One word. "Oh." Then after a minute, "Mara, I'm so sorry. And then I shouldn't have texted you when I did. I only had Diane's version." Mara wrote back, "I know. It's okay." It was okay. Tasha had done what a reasonable person does when a mutual friend shares something alarming. She'd reached out. She hadn't assumed anything. She'd just asked if Mara was okay. That wasn't a betrayal. That was just Diane's story spreading before Mara had a chance to respond to it. Kira called rather than texting, which was very Kira. She was on the phone for 40 minutes, cycling through disbelief and apology and something that gradually revealed itself as not surprise exactly, but recognition. I've had some weird conversations with Diane lately, she said. I didn't know what to make of them. She's been, I don't know, something was off. I couldn't tell you what. Mara said she understood. Diane sent a message the following morning. It was long. Several paragraphs. It said she had been under enormous stress. It said she had worried about Mara for a long time because she'd seen signs. She still insisted she'd seen signs that Joel might not be who he seemed. It said she might have confused some details. It said she only ever wanted to protect Mara. It said she hoped Mara could understand that her intentions were good even if her execution was wrong. Mara read it once. She put her phone down. She did not respond. She blocked the number. Not in a dramatic way. Not in a way she announced to anyone. She just closed the door quietly and completely the way you close a door that you've decided you don't need to go through anymore. The weeks after that were quieter than Mara expected. She had braced herself for messiness for Diane to escalate, to reach out through Tasha or Kira to make scenes or send more messages or show up somewhere. But Diane did none of those things. Or rather, she did some of them. She did reach out to Tasha, and she did try to reach out to Kira, but what she encountered was something more impassive than hostility. Tasha told Mara about it carefully and without embellishment. Diane had called and given her a version of events that was again slightly different from the versions that had come before. In this, telling Diane said she had been told by a mutual acquaintance, someone whose name she wouldn't or couldn't specify, that Joel had been seen around town with another woman, and that she'd reported what she'd been told, not what she'd seen herself. She had framed the entire thing as a confusion. She had heard something, she had passed it along, she had maybe presented it with more certainty than she had, but her heart was in the right place. It was, Mara noted, when Tasha told her a third version. The first version I saw him. The second version I was there. I had just come from the farmer's market. It was around 2. The third version I heard from someone I was passing along, a rumor I might have oversold my certainty. Tasha had listened to the third version, said that she understood, and then not called Diane again. It wasn't a dramatic break. It was something quieter, and in some ways more complete. The group chat, which had been active for 3 years, which had been the container for birthday plans and bad date stories, and the particular trivia of 4 friendships woven together, went quiet. Not because anyone announced anything, just because Diane stopped receiving responses that warranted replies, and gradually the chat reconfigured itself into a 3-person conversation, and Diane was no longer in it. Kira told Mara, I don't think she's a bad person. I just don't trust her anymore. And I'm not sure I ever want to be in a position where I have to trust her about something important. Mara thought that was about right. Here's what she never got. She never got an explanation. Not a real one. Diane never said in plain language, here is what I was doing and here is why. The message she sent was full of words, but none of them were the ones that would have meant something. None of them were, I made this up. None of them were, I was trying to damage your marriage. None of them were, I am genuinely sorry for what I did, and I know that's not something I can ask you to absorb, but I want you to know I understand the shape of the harm. Those words never came. They still haven't. And Mara found that she was okay with not having them. Not easily, not without grief, because 9 years is 9 years, and the loss of a friendship like that doesn't feel clean no matter what it was built on or turned out to be. She grieved it in the specific sideways way that you grieve something that you've also been relieved to lose. The thing that hurt wasn't losing Diane. The thing that hurt was losing the idea of Diane she'd had for 9 years. The version of this person who was exactly what she seemed to be. But ideas of people aren't people, and the evidence had been collected, and the timeline had spoken. 3 months after the night at the kitchen table, Mara and Joel took a trip to Boise. Not for any particular reason, or rather for exactly the reason you think. Joel wanted to show her the hotel, the diner, the job site where he'd spent that weekend. He wanted the city to be theirs, not the site of a story that had almost upended everything, but just a place they'd been together. They booked 2 nights at the same hotel. They went to the diner and ordered the chicken fried steak, both of them because they'd been curious about it since October. It was large, and it was not particularly special, and it was exactly the kind of thing that becomes a small, durable memory of a shared life. So this is what you were eating while I was losing my mind, Mara said. This is the chicken fried steak, Joel confirmed. It's fine, he agreed. Not life-changing. No, pretty okay, though. Yeah, she said. Pretty okay. They stayed 2 nights. They walked around downtown Boise, which is a perfectly pleasant city that neither of them had spent much time in before. They got coffee in the mornings and talked about nothing particular. They went home on Sunday feeling like something had been returned to them, not repaired because it hadn't been broken. Not really, more like reclaimed, taken back from the possibility of being lost. Months have passed now. Mara says the friendship is something she thinks about less and less, which is not the same as not thinking about it at all. Sometimes she catches herself reaching for her phone to send Diane something, an article, a funny video, something that would have been their kind of thing, and then she remembers and puts the phone back down. That's the part that no amount of documentation repairs. The muscle memory of a friendship, the way you keep reaching for something that's no longer there. She doesn't regret how she handled it. She thinks she handled it the right way, carefully, proportionately with evidence rather than emotion leading the charge. She didn't blow anything up prematurely. She didn't confront Diane with accusations she couldn't support. She waited until she had the full picture, and then she laid it out clearly, and then she let Diane decide what to do with that. Diane decided to leave. Diane decided not to explain. And Mara decided ultimately that was an answer too, not the one she would have chosen, but an answer. If Diane had genuinely been confused if she had seen someone who looked like Joel and convinced herself it was him and panicked and told people before she could think it through the receipts, gave her an off-ramp. She could have seen them and said clearly, unambiguously, I was wrong. I made a mistake, and I'm so sorry, and I don't fully understand how I was so certain when I was so wrong, but I was wrong. That would have been terrible. It would have damaged the friendship, but it would have been survivable. She didn't take that exit. And not taking that exit told Mara what she needed to know. Joel, for his part, doesn't talk about it much. He said, once a few weeks after, I keep trying to figure out what I did that would make someone want to do that. And I keep coming back to nothing. I'm not saying I'm perfect, but I've been decent to her. I've been kind. And I don't know what to do with not knowing. Mara told him he didn't have to do anything with it. Some things don't come with explanations. Some closures aren't closed. You collect what evidence exists, and you make the decision the evidence supports, and then you go to Boise, and you eat the chicken fried steak, and you come home. That's what you do. Tasha and Kira are still very much in Mara's life. The group chat reconstituted as 3 is still active. There was a birthday dinner last month. Kira's and the 3 of them went to a Thai place and laughed for 3 hours, and no one mentioned Diane by name. They didn't need to. They had, without discussing it formally, simply redistributed their care and attention and inside jokes into a formation that worked without her. That's the thing about friend groups. They are resilient. Lose one pillar, and the structure doesn't always collapse. It adjusts. The ceiling is lower, maybe. The room is a little smaller than it used to be, but it holds. Mara sent me this story because she said she needed to tell it to someone outside the situation, someone who couldn't be affected by the telling. She said she's told pieces of it to people who know her, but she wanted to say the whole thing start to finish to someone who just had to sit with it. So I sat with it, and here is what I think. I think Mara did something very hard in a way that was very quiet. She was handed an allegation that, if true, would have changed her life. And instead of reacting to it, instead of confronting her husband while she was still in shock, instead of making decisions while the emotion was loudest, she did what she does. She tracked the timeline. She asked for specifics. She waited for the story to tell on itself. And the story did, because stories that aren't true always leave something out. They always have a gap, an inconsistency, a detail that can't survive contact with the calendar. The liars who are good at this know to keep their stories vague, keep the edges soft, don't commit to a date or a time or a specific location. Diane made the mistake that most liars make. She thought that adding specificity would make the story more believable. She didn't realize that specificity is also what makes a story checkable. The timestamp got her. That's all it took. One timestamp on a diner receipt in Boise, Idaho, and 9 years of fiction came apart at the seams. Mara didn't yell. She didn't threaten. She didn't do anything she'd be embarrassed by later. She just laid the receipts on the table and asked a question. That was enough. As for Mara and Joel, they're good. They're fine. In the deep, unflashy way that fine actually means when you mean it. They still argue about the recycling. Joel still travels, still texts when he lands, still photographs mediocre regional food and sends it to her with deadpan captions. She still has the Joel's America folder on her phone. It has 27 photos in it now. The Boise chicken fried steak is in there, timestamp intact. Sometimes she looks at that photo and thinks about what it was being used as what it accidentally was without knowing it in that week in October when everything got strange. Proof of an ordinary Saturday. Proof of a man being exactly where he said he was eating, exactly what he said he was eating at exactly the time he said he was there. That's what love looks like sometimes. Not grand declarations, just the accumulating record of a person being who they said they were. She trusts that record, she always has, and she sleeps just fine. If you've been sitting with this one for a while, what was the moment it turned for you? When Diane's story got more specific instead of less, or when the Boise receipt came out, I'm curious where your gut landed. Drop it in the comments. There's a new one up tomorrow. Same deal. Someone thought they were holding all the cards. Turns out the other person had been counting them the whole time. Take care of yourself. I'll talk to you soon.